Meet me at Placa Rail in 30 minutes. The night is young, and I've got something special planned. The evening air in Barcelona is warm, almost too warm for the time of year. The city feels alive, brimming with energy, its ancient streets winding beneath the glint of fading sunlight. Yet, despite the hum of life surrounding him, James stands alone on the rooftop of a quiet hotel in El Born, the heart of the city's history. His eyes linger on the spires of La Sagrada Familia, looming against the darkening sky like sentinels guarding the city's secrets. The glow from the city's lights reflects in his tired eyes, but something is wrong. It's the feeling that something is about to change, something he can't stop. Something he might not even want to stop. There's nothing more painful than falling for someone you can never trust. Especially when that person is the one who betrayed you. The words echo in his mind, thick with regret. James never thought he'd be standing here lost, confused, in a city so far from home. He thought he came to Barcelona for escape, to leave the heartache of his past behind. But as the lights flicker below him, he knows that his past is following him, shadowing every step. His phone buzzes, cutting through his spiraling thoughts. He pulls it from his pocket with a quick, almost nervous movement. It's a message from Michael, his local guide, the person who seemed to have unlocked something in him he thought was lost forever. It's 30 minutes already, aren't you still coming out? James's stomach tightens as his fingers hover over the screen. The words are simple enough, but they hit him like a jolt. Why this place, this time? Why does Michael always choose the dark, quiet corners of the city when their connection could be so much more? And why does the unease that's been nagging him for days since their first shared laugh over a glass of wine on La Rambla only seem to grow stronger as the hours pass? He looks out at the city, now full of life but distant, unreachable. It's as though Barcelona is a city of contradictions, beautiful and alive, yet cold and indifferent. Just like the person he's come to care for, the one who could easily break him. The message feels like a promise, but it's also a warning. A part of him wants to ignore it, to stay here on the rooftop, away from the uncertainty that Michael brings. But another part of him, the part that still hopes for something, anything real, can't resist. James steps off the rooftop, the soft hum of the city growing louder as he moves. The shadows of Barcelona stretch long, casting a chilling embrace over him. But it's too late to turn back now. He's already lost. And soon, he'll discover how far that loss will go. James didn't come to Barcelona to sightsee. He came to escape. Escape from the aftermath of a life he no longer recognized, one filled with the broken pieces of promises and hurtful goodbyes. But then came Michael. He was a local guide in Barcelona, the kind of person who seemed to know everything about the city, its hidden alleyways, its forgotten secrets, and the best tapas bars that most tourists could never find. To James, Michael was an enigma. Charming, confident, with a disarming smile that made everyone feel at ease. Michael had appeared in James's life on the first day of his trip, offering to show him around the city. The offer had seemed innocent enough, just a guide, right? Someone to take him through the streets of a city James had never seen before. But from the moment their paths crossed, something else lingered between them. James had tried to ignore it. He wasn't looking for anything serious. He wasn't looking for anything at all, really. But Michael's easy smile, his laughter that seemed to echo just a little too brightly, the way his eyes held something unspoken when they locked for just a second too long, these things planted a seed that James hadn't been prepared for. One evening, they walked through the El Raval district, the neon lights from the nearby shops casting a colorful glow over the street. It was that moment, as they turned a corner, that their hands brushed lightly for the first time. The briefest touch, barely a spark, yet, it lingered in the air, a question left unanswered. "Sorry," Michael muttered, his voice softer than usual. "I didn't mean to." "No," James cut him off, his voice surprising even him. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine, not really. There was an electricity in that simple touch, something that made his chest tighten and his mind race. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Michael glanced at him quickly, his expression unreadable, before he cleared his throat and changed the subject. But James felt the weight of the moment. But that yearning came with its own set of fears. Was this just a fleeting attraction? Was Michael just being kind, a part of his job as a guide? Or was there something more? As the days passed, James found himself torn. There were evenings when Michael's charm seemed to slip away just enough for James to see the vulnerability beneath. When they were alone, Michael's laughter softened, his eyes shadowed with something James couldn't quite understand. Yet every time James thought he might be able to ask, Michael would retreat, pulling back into the safety of his confident facade. One evening, they walk along the beach near Barceloneta, the sand cool under their feet and the sound of the waves crashing gently on the shore. The sky above is a deep indigo, dotted with stars, and the soft glow of the city illuminates the horizon. They stroll in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that feels familiar, easy, and yet, there is an unmistakable tension between them, like an invisible thread pulling them together, only to stretch tighter with every step. James turns to Michael, his heart beating a little faster than usual. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place?" he asks, the words slipping out before he can stop them. He hadn't planned on asking, but there's something about the way Michael looks tonight more vulnerable than usual that makes James feel the need to push, to know more. Michael's gaze flicks away for just a moment, his jaw tightening before he turns back to the sea. "Why would I leave?" he responds, his tone light, but there's a hesitation in his words. He forces a laugh, but it feels strained, like a reflex to avoid something he doesn't want to acknowledge. "I mean," James continues, unsure whether he wants an answer or not, "don't you ever get tired of being in the same place? Don't you ever want to see something different, something new?" For a long moment, Michael is silent. The ocean continues its rhythm beside them, but the quiet between them feels deafening. Then, slowly, Michael shrugs, a half-smile playing on his lips. "I think there's a certain beauty in staying in one place. It's like you get to understand it in ways no one else can. You know all its secrets." James nods, sensing that Michael is speaking more to himself than to him, that there's something buried in those words that Michael isn't ready to uncover. But still, he presses on, unable to resist the pull of his curiosity. "And what about people?" James asks, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever get attached? Do you let anyone close?" Michael stops walking, his gaze turning to James with an intensity that makes his heart skip. "I've never let anyone in this far," he says softly, his voice almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret he's kept for too long. The words hang between them, a confession and a challenge, and for the briefest of moments, James wonders if he's hearing something more than just a passing remark. He wants to say something, to ask what Michael means, but the words seem stuck in his throat. Instead, he just stands there, watching Michael's face, searching for any hint of what lies behind his guarded expression. Michael looks away first, taking a step back. "I need to go," he mutters, the sudden change in his demeanor cutting through the moment. "I have something I need to do, but I'll see you tomorrow." And with that, he turns and walks away, his steps quick and determined. James watches him disappear into the crowd, the sense of unfinished business gnawing at him. The connection they shared just moments ago feels fragile now, slipping through his fingers like sand. As the days pass, James tries to convince himself that Michael's departure was nothing more than a momentary distraction, but the doubt grows. He finds himself noticing the small details, the way Michael avoids certain places, the way he's often just a little too vague when it comes to his past. There are moments when Michael is almost too perfect, too carefully constructed in his mannerisms and his words. He has an answer for everything, but the answers always seem like just enough to keep James from asking more. One evening, they meet at a small bar off La Rambla, a place Michael had suggested, saying it was a hidden gem of the city. The soft glow of the candles on the tables casts flickering shadows over the room, and the laughter of patrons fills the air, but there's a heaviness in the space between them. Michael sits across from James, his smile faint, his posture slightly stiff. They've barely exchanged a word since Michael's sudden departure the day before, and James can feel the tension in his chest and ache that he can't shake. Michael takes a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room, before they land on James. "How's your trip been?" he asks, his voice light, but there's something distant in his eyes, as though he's not really seeing James at all. "It's been good," James replies, though his words feel hollow. "But I can't help but wonder, why do you keep pulling away?" Michael's gaze flickers briefly, his lips pressing together, as if he's struggling to find the right words. "I told you before, I don't let people in." His voice softens, almost apologetic, but the wall he's built is still there, clear and unmovable. "I guess I've gotten used to keeping things at a distance. But why?" James presses, leaning in, feeling the ache of unanswered questions building within him. "Why do you keep me close, only to push me away?" What is it you're hiding, Michael? Michael's expression hardens, and for a moment, James sees something in his eyes, a flicker of pain, of regret, but it disappears as quickly as it came. I don't have answers for you, James, Michael says, his voice low, almost tired. I wish I could tell you everything, but I can't. Not now. The silence that follows is thick with unspoken words, the tension crackling between them. James feels the weight of it pressing down on him, suffocating him with the questions that won't be answered. He wants to reach across the table, to make Michael understand, to make him see that they don't have to be distant, that they could make something real of this connection. But instead, he stays where he is, trapped in the web of their complicated, fragile bond. A bond that feels as though it's breaking with every word unsaid, with every touch left unexplored. As they part ways that night, James feels as though he's walking away from something that could have been, something that might have meant more if only they hadn't kept running from it. He can't help but wonder if Michael is just another person who will slip through his fingers, just like all the others. Or if, perhaps, there's more to Michael's guardedness, something deeper that James hasn't yet uncovered. And with that thought, the night grows colder, and the distance between them seems to stretch even further. James knew Michael wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, moments where James sensed Michael pulling away, his secrets buried too deep to be fully uncovered. But there had also been moments, fleeting, yet meaningful, when James had thought Michael might let him in, when they seemed to be dancing closer to something that could grow beyond the walls they'd built. That night, James stood outside a small, dimly lit bar near the heart of the city. It was a place Michael had mentioned in passing, one of his favorite spots, but James had never been there himself. The thought of surprising Michael by showing up unannounced had seemed like a good idea, something spontaneous. Maybe it would break through whatever wall Michael had built around himself. Maybe it would make things feel real. As James approached the entrance, he paused, adjusting the collar of his jacket, his heart suddenly heavy with anticipation. He didn't know why, but something inside him felt off. The unease from days earlier, the way Michael had always seemed to slip away at the last minute, the way he'd always kept a part of himself hidden, replayed in his mind like an old movie reel. But even as his instinct screamed at him to turn away, to forget this idea entirely, he pushed on. He was here now. He would see it through. The bar was a small, intimate space, dimly lit, with warm yellow lights flickering softly against the dark wooden walls. Music hummed from a jukebox in the corner, a nostalgic tune that felt too loud for the intimate setting. James stepped inside, scanning the room for Michael. He'd almost expected to see him sitting at the bar, a drink in hand, his trademark smile ready to greet him. But there was something wrong, something that hit him like a punch to the stomach. There, at the far corner of the bar, sat Michael, not alone, but with another man, a man James had never seen before. The stranger's arm was draped over Michael's shoulder, and they were both laughing, leaning into each other in a way that made James's chest tighten. The sound of their laughter felt wrong, as if it was a cruel reminder of everything James had allowed himself to believe. The way the stranger's fingers lightly brushed against Michael's arm, the soft exchange of glances between them, it was more than just friendly. It was intimate. It was too much. For a moment, James stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe. The image before him, the sight of Michael, his smile so genuine, so free, was like a dagger to his heart. The way the stranger's fingers lightly brushed against Michael's arm, the soft exchange of glances between them, it was more than just friendly. It was intimate. It was too much. The world around him seemed to shift, the air thick with the weight of disbelief and hurt. His legs shook, his mind racing, trying to process what he was seeing, what he had just walked in on. Was this a mistake? Was it some kind of misunderstanding? Maybe it was a joke, a harmless touch, anything that could explain the scene in front of him. But as his eyes locked on Michael's face, the flicker of recognition, the slight tension in Michael's posture, told him everything he needed to know. Michael hadn't seen him yet. James's heart pounded as he turned to leave, but the sound of his name reached his ears, pulling him back. James, the voice was Michael's, but it didn't sound the same. It was laced with something that James couldn't quite place. Surprise, maybe? Or guilt. He turned slowly, his breath caught in his throat. There was no mistaking the look on Michael's face now. It was a mix of shock and something else, something that James didn't want to see. Michael stood up from the table, the stranger looking between the two of them, his eyes narrowing, unsure of what to do. But Michael's attention was fixed on James now, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. This isn't what it looks like," Michael stammered, his voice sounding strained, like he was trying to gather the words, trying to come up with some excuse that would make the scene in front of them make sense. But there was no excuse. There was no reason that could undo the damage of the betrayal James felt crawling under his skin. James's hands trembled, his vision blurring with the sudden rush of emotions: hurt, confusion, anger. His chest ached, the weight of the moment pressing down on him with an unbearable force. The moment he had feared, the moment he had known deep down would come, had arrived. It wasn't just a lie, it was a betrayal. A betrayal that tore through everything he had allowed himself to believe about Michael, about their connection. The stranger, tall, with dark hair and a sharp jawline, finally spoke up, his voice a bit too casual for James's liking. "I told you he'd be upset, Michael. You should have just told him." James's stomach churned at the words. He looked at the man with growing fury, realizing this wasn't just a random stranger. It was Mark, a man Michael had mentioned once before in passing, a friend from the past. But how could this be? Why had Michael kept Mark a secret? Why had he led James to believe their connection was something it wasn't? Michael's face flushed, and he shifted uneasily on his feet, but the words didn't come. James stood there, caught in the whirlwind of his emotions, too hurt to speak, too lost to find his voice. Mark's presence, the way they interacted so casually, it was like a slap to his face, a reminder that James had been nothing more than a temporary distraction, a momentary reprieve for Michael from whatever real connection he shared with Mark. "James, listen," Michael began, but James cut him off, the pain in his voice raw, cutting through the air. Don't even try to explain it," James whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought I was the one you cared about. I thought we were different." His words faltered as he took a step back, the room spinning around him. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the bar, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that felt final. The cold night air hit him like a slap to the face. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His mind raced, but there were no answers, only the crushing weight of betrayal, of being used, of being discarded without a second thought. He had trusted Michael. He had let him in, even if just a little, even though his heart had begged him to be cautious. And now, that trust had been shattered. The walls he had spent so long building around himself had crumbled, and in their place was nothing but the raw, exposed pain of knowing that the person he had thought he could rely on had betrayed him in the worst way possible. The betrayal wasn't just a momentary lapse, it was everything. It was a reminder that love, or whatever he had allowed himself to believe it was, always came with a price. And James had just paid it. The night was long, far longer than it should have been. The pain of what James had seen, what he had heard, lingered in every corner of his mind. It had been hours since he walked away from the bar, from Michael, from the tangled mess of emotions that had clouded his judgment for days. The city was quieter now, the streets emptying as the hour grew late, but inside his small hotel room, James couldn't escape the noise. His mind kept replaying the same images, the same words. Michael's smile, the warmth in his eyes when he was with Mark, everything felt like a betrayal, a cruel joke that James had foolishly believed. He wasn't angry just at Michael, he was angry at himself for falling for it, for trusting someone who clearly wasn't worthy of it. His mind raced, and yet, he couldn't decide. Should he confront Michael? Should he face him, hear the excuses that would surely come, or should he just leave it all behind, forget that Michael ever existed in his life? The questions swirled in his head, each one louder than the last, until they drowned out everything else. He didn't know what he wanted anymore. His heart was torn between the desire to understand and the overwhelming need to protect himself from further hurt. But despite everything, despite the hurt and betrayal, something deep inside him still ached. A voice in his chest whispered that maybe there was more to the story, that maybe Michael had his own demons, his own reasons for pushing people away. Could it be that Michael wasn't the villain James had painted him to be? Or was he just another person who would leave him broken, another lesson in how not to trust? The sound of a knock at the door shattered his thoughts, and he jumped, heart racing in his chest. He wasn't expecting anyone who could be at his door this late. Hesitant, he stood, the decision now out of his hands. He knew who it would be before he even opened the door. When he did, Michael stood there, looking smaller than James had ever seen him. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by an almost defeated posture. The expression on his face raw, desperate. and filled with regret shocked James more than he cared to admit. But the anger, the betrayal still burned, like an open wound that refused to heal. "I need to talk to you," Michael said, his voice low and fragile, like a man who had been broken by his own actions. He hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "Please, James, just let me explain." "You don't get to explain this, Michael," James said, his voice tight with emotion. He stepped back slightly, keeping the door open but maintaining the distance between them. "I saw it, Michael. I saw you with him. You've been lying to me this entire time." Michael's face crumpled with guilt, his eyes lowering. "I never wanted you to see it like this, James. I never meant for you to find out this way." He paused, struggling to find the right words, his hands fidgeting by his sides. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted to. Then why did you do it?" James demanded, his voice rising despite himself. "Why did you let me believe we had something when all along you were with him?" He gestured vaguely, his eyes bitter, though his heart was heavy with the weight of the truth. "What was it all for, Michael? What was the point of pretending?" Michael stepped closer, his voice trembling now. "Because I was afraid. I was afraid of you walking away the moment you saw who I really was." James blinked, the words sinking into him slowly, painfully. "What are you talking about?" Michael hesitated before speaking, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a part of me that I've never shown anyone. A part I was too scared to reveal because I thought you'd run the moment you knew the truth. Mark, he's not just a friend. He's someone from my past, someone who knows me in ways you can't. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to be honest with you without pushing you away." James's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he couldn't process Michael's words. "So all of this, everything we shared, was just a lie? Was I just someone to fill the space between you and him?" "No," Michael said quickly, reaching for James's arm, but James pulled away, the gesture more painful than it should have been. "No, I swear, I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I cared about you, James. I still care about you. But I was too scared to let you in, scared you'd leave me just like everyone else who's ever walked out of my life." James's eyes burned with inch tears, and his chest ached with the weight of Michael's confession. It was more than just the betrayal, it was the realization that he had opened his heart to someone who wasn't fully there, who had kept a part of himself locked away. Before he could speak, a voice echoed from behind Michael, soft but persistent. "A third party, Mark. You have to understand, James," Mark said, his tone gentle but insistent. "Michael didn't want this. He's always pushed people away before they could get too close. You have to know it wasn't personal. He didn't know how to handle something real. You were real to him, and that scared him more than anything." James stood there, the words crashing over him like a tidal wave. Part of him wanted to shout, to scream at them both for making him feel like this, caught in their web of secrets, their pain. But another part of him felt something else, a tenderness, a flicker of understanding for the man standing before him. It wasn't easy to admit, but he couldn't ignore the rawness in Michael's voice, the vulnerability that finally broke through the mask he had so carefully worn. But was it enough? Was the apology enough to heal the broken trust, the betrayal that felt like it had shattered everything James thought he knew? Michael's eyes were filled with uncertainty, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his own guilt. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Michael said quietly. "But I need you to know that I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how to pull away, and I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing you. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry." For a long moment, James stood there, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. His heart was torn, his trust shattered, but in the broken silence between them, there was something else, something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. But only if he was willing to let go of the hurt. Only if he could find a way to trust again. The days following Michael's confession passed slowly, each one dragging with the weight of decisions unmade and emotions too raw to process. The space between James and Michael seemed to stretch impossibly wide, filled with too many words unsaid, too many feelings unacknowledged. The truth had finally come out, but it hadn't healed anything. James had spent days wandering the city, lost in his thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. He had been so sure of what he and Michael had, so certain that there was something genuine between them. But now, each memory felt hollow, a ghost of a connection that had once felt so real. He had been given a glimpse of a love he thought he could trust, only to have it ripped away in an instant. And though part of him still longed for Michael, still ached for the warmth and care he'd once felt in his presence, the other part of him knew that this was not a love he could cling to. This wasn't something he could rebuild, no matter how much it hurt. There were times when James thought about walking away without looking back. The idea of leaving Barcelona, leaving Michael behind, was tempting. In the end, it was the quiet, lingering ache of knowing that he had loved someone who had let him down that kept him tethered. No matter how much he wanted to ignore it, there was a part of him that would never forget the connection they had shared, the way Michael had made him feel seen, the way they had laughed together, walked through the city together, shared moments that felt too special to be tainted by betrayal. But the truth was clear now: some things can't be fixed. Some wounds can't be healed. James made the decision to meet Michael one last time. He had known this moment would come, the moment when their paths would diverge, but he wasn't sure how to face it. He had told Michael he needed space, that he needed time to think, to process the storm of emotions swirling inside him. But now, standing at the edge of the park near Montjuic, a place they had visited together early on in their time in Barcelona, he knew it was time to say goodbye. Michael stood a few steps away, his hands in his pockets. His shoulders slumped, as though the weight of everything they had been through had settled on him in the quietest way. He had come here for the same reason as James, to find some kind of closure, to say the things they couldn't say before. But neither of them knew how to begin. James's voice, when it finally broke the silence, sounded tired, weighed down by more than just his words. "I can't stay here, Michael. I've thought about it for days, and I can't. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay, that I can forgive you for what happened. Maybe in time, I'll understand it better, but right now." He trailed off, looking out at the view, unable to meet Michael's gaze. "I need to heal. I need to be somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't remind me of what we were and what we'll never be." Michael's face tightened, and for the first time, James saw the full extent of his regret, of the pain he had caused. Michael took a step forward, his voice low and trembling. "James, I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. I've carried so many things inside of me for so long, and I was afraid of letting you in because I didn't want to lose you. But I see now. I see that I've lost you anyway." He stopped, his words hanging heavy in the air. "I don't want to lose you, but I understand if you can't forgive me. I've done things I can't undo." The words cut deep, and yet, they felt like the truth James had been waiting for. Michael's vulnerability, his brokenness, was both heartbreaking and too little, too late. It was impossible to ignore the pull he still felt toward Michael, but James knew, deep down, that some things couldn't be undone. Some mistakes couldn't be forgiven, not in the way they needed to be. James finally turned to face him, his eyes burning with inched tears. "Maybe love isn't about perfection," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's about accepting the flaws, the mistakes, but some wounds, they can't be healed that easily." He let out a long, slow breath, his chest tightening with the weight of what he was about to say. "I can't be what you need, Michael. I can't keep hoping for something that isn't there. I have to let go." Without another word, James stepped back, his heart heavy but steady. "Goodbye, Michael." The words felt strange, like they didn't belong to him, but they were the only ones he could say. They had shared something beautiful, something fleeting, but now it was time to walk away. Michael didn't move. He didn't reach out. He simply watched, his eyes full of unshed tears, as James turned and walked away from the place where it had all begun. As he walked, the weight in his chest lessened, just a little. He knew that healing would take time, that the scars would linger, but in that moment, there was a quiet acceptance. He wasn't leaving with bitterness, but with the understanding that sometimes, love wasn't enough. Sometimes, the best thing you could do for yourself was to walk away. The city around him remained unchanged, the sun dipping below the horizon as he made his way down the path. Life would go on. And so would he. If you were in James's shoes, would you forgive Michael? Could you ever rebuild the trust that was broken so completely? Or would you walk away, like James did, leaving the past behind and moving forward without looking back? Tell us your thoughts. What would you do? Would you walk away and move on with the hope that healing comes with time? Or would you try to rebuild what was broken, even if it meant risking more hurt? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's open up a conversation about trust, betrayal, and what it takes to truly forgive. If you enjoyed the emotional roller coaster of this story, hit like and subscribe for more videos that take you on a journey through the highs and lows of love, trust, and everything in between. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might find comfort, strength, or understanding in James's journey.